Uh, Thanks to Sanjeev ji. Thanks to AUROMIRA Relic Center for having given me the opportunity to be amongst you all again. Let me consecrate each and every word, each and every thought that comes to my mind to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And I thank the Mother's grace for having given me this opportunity. Last two sessions, we had thought about the ignorance, the knowledge, and while discussing these two aspects, one more important aspect of our own being kept on coming again and again. That was subliminal self. Why Sri Aurobindo was referring this particular part of our own being is that this is our true mentality. This is our true inner self because it is nearer to the truest self of ourselves, that is our psychic being, our soul. The psychic being is located in the subliminal self. So, without going into our subliminal self, we can't reach our psychic being because psychic being is in close touch with our subliminal self is in very close contact with our psychic being. That's why it's very important. So first, what we shall see is that what really subliminal self is, as described by Sri Aurobindo in the Life Divine, and then we shall see why it is important, and then finally we'll briefly touch upon how to get into that part of the being. So this is how this my presentation is organized. You just have this picture in the mind. With that picture in the mind, if we go into the explanation given by Sri Aurobindo, we'll be able to understand much better. So look at the first the first circle I have given. It's been given. The first circle, it's a collection of concentric circles. Outer circle, colored in orange, it's a surface being. Surface being means what? It contains our outer physical, mental, vital, in which most of the men live. Most of us live in this surface being. Next, it is colored in blue. That is subliminal being. The subliminal being consists of inner physical, inner mental, inner vital. Whatever we have seen on the surface, the inner part of the physical, mental, vital. This is the major portion of our being. This constitutes most of our being. Again, deeper into that comes inmost or true, physical, mental, vital. The same parts, the inmost. Why it's called inmost? Because it's almost in touch with our psychic being. That's why it's called inmost. The activities of for physical, vital, and mental, that is, inmost physical, inmost mental, inmost vital, have the stamp of psychic in them. That's why it's called, because the action of a true or inmost physical, mental, vital has the stamp of physical, psychic being in them. That's why it's called inmost, because it's very close touch with the psychic being. So this is how our constitution is organized. Okay. And the subliminal being is where our thoughts and feelings, they originate. We think that uh, think that our surface mind is a cause of all our thoughts, but it's not so. The subliminal being has the origin of our thoughts and feelings, and there the sources and motives of our action are present. Why our surface mind is not a true mentality? Why our subliminal being is a true mentality? Why Sri Aurobindo calls our subliminal being as a true mentality? Because our surface mind, it is very much hampered, bound and conditioned by the outer body and bodily life, limitations of the nervous system and all that. It is bound by our physical organs. We can, for example, we can say we will be able to think much better when our body is in a very good condition, when we are in a very good sound health. Supposing we have a severe headache, can we think properly? Can our mind function properly? Or we have a serious ailment in our body. Can our mind function properly? It can't. That's why Sri Aurobindo calls our surface mind is very much hampered by our physical body. Whereas our subliminal mind or subliminal being, that's a true mentality. It is superior to the limitations of the surface mind. Whatever limitations our surface mind has, a subliminal being is above that. It doesn't have those limitations. It exceeds the physical mind and organs. So that's why the subliminal being is called the true mentality, because it doesn't have the limitations of a surface mind. Okay. What really is our surface self? There are two selves we can see. As of now, we are able to see two selves. One is our surface self, consisting of our outer physical, mental, and vital. Another is our subliminal self, consisting of our inner physical, inner mental, inner vital. Are we aware of this subliminal being? Are we aware? Are we really aware of all the functions of our subliminal being? We are most part of our life. Most part of our life, we are in our surface. We live in our surface being only, and when we are awake, we are said to be in our waking consciousness. When we are awake, we are said to be in our waking consciousness. We think that when we are awake, we are fully aware of things. That is how we think, but it's not so. In fact, our waking consciousness shows that we are ignorant of the most part of our being. Most part of our being lies below our surface being, about which we are not aware. So what Sri Aurobindo calls our waking mind and ego, which functions superficially, they are a superimposition. What he calls is that they are superimposition And it is something fixed, artificially above. It's not a real part of the this thing. What he says is that supposing you imagine an iceberg, you are traveling a traveling on the sea, and you're able to see an iceberg. You're able to see only the tip of the iceberg, whereas the major portion of the iceberg is submerged under the ocean. Like that, Sri Aurobindo gives uh, another example also, is that our mind and ego are the crown and dome of a temple jutting out from the waves, while the great body of the building is submerged under the surface of the waters. That's how this is the uh, this is how he describes our subliminal being. Our mind and ego are very much present outside, but that's not our real self. It's just like something projected outside. It's a superimposition. But what is submerged within, what is not visible to a surface self, surface seeing, is that is called subliminal being. That's why Sri Aurobindo calls that our in our waking consciousness, we are ignorant of most of our own being. It's a very irony that we are awake. In our waking consciousness, we think we know of ourselves, but it's not really so. In our waking consciousness, we are quite ignorant of a great part of our individual being and becoming. Becoming means how we function, how we react. That's called becoming. We are quite ignorant. That's what Sri Aurobindo says. So this is a difference between a surface self and the subliminal self. Our surface self is quite ignorant, whereas subliminal self knows everything. One may ask, why this arrangement? Why this arrangement? Why at all we should be ignorant of our subliminal self? As we are quite aware of our surface self, why aren't we aware of our subliminal self? That's a question comes to our minds. See, you know that the man is an evolutionary being. So, as a part of the nature constructed the individual in such a way that the first priority is given for the individualization of the being. The individual first, the man has to individualize himself. Why it has to happen? Because only by individualization, a man can concentrate his energy and aspire for his higher growth in the evolutionary ladder. So the individualization is very important. To enable this individualization, our outward nature consisting of our outer mind and then ego, it is shut from the subliminal being by a wall so that it can concentrate exclusively on itself, on the outward nature, so that it can individualize itself around one's ego. Just to facilitate his individualization, there is a wall erected between his outer self, consisting of mostly ego and associated part of the mind, and then his subliminal being. Because of this wall erected between his outer mind and his subliminal being, inner being, we are unable to perceive what is going on in our subliminal self. So this is a why this makes us ignorant of our subliminal self. As I told you, this egocentric individualization of mind, life, and body, without the intervention of the deeper and wider truth of a larger existence, is made possible because of this wall. This is an arrangement by the nature. But as Sri Aurobindo said elsewhere, the ego was the helper and ego is the bar. After some time, this becomes unnecessary. This arrangement becomes unnecessary. One has to go beyond his ego so that he can rise up in the higher consciousness of the ladder. So this is only a temporary arrangement. But this temporary arrangement, because of this temporary arrangement, what happens is that there's a wall between our outer self and our subliminal self. That's the real self. And we are unable to, we are quite ignorant of our subliminal self. But yet, what Sri Aurobindo says is that there are, we can get a glimpse of our subliminal self through small cracks and holes in the wall. How it happens? Because we get occasional, everyone gets these experiences. We get occasional intimations, premonitions, inspirations. We know that it is coming from us, but we don't know the source. Sometimes everyone gets this kind of uh, intimations, premonitions, and then inspirations. These are all coming through these cracks and holes in the wall between our surface mind and the sublim and the inner being. But since it's not a full opening, we are able to get only the glimpses. The perception of our subliminal self by our outer mind is not very clear. We are not able to perceive clearly what our subliminal self really is, because we are not able to get a full view of that. Again, Sri Aurobindo says, we think we are acting. Most of us think that we act as per our own volition. This is how we think. Whatever I will, I do. Whatever I prefer to do, I do. This is what most of us think. But what prompts us to act? The source lies elsewhere. The source lies in subliminal being. We don't know about it. Secondly, we get our own inspirations, we get our intuitions, life motives. Everything comes from there only. For example, if we take the poets, literary genius, artist, their source of creation comes from the subliminal being. In fact, no less than a person, Einstein, had admitted that. I would quote him. It's an eye opener for all of us. You know that Einstein was one of the foremost scientific persons we ever knew. He says that, a quote, I believe in intuition and inspiration. At times I feel certain I'm right while not knowing the reason. I very rarely think in words at all. A thought comes and I may try to express it in words afterwards. Imagine, remember that this is not spoken by a yogi. This is spoken by a scientist. So what Sri Aurobindo says is that most of our intuitions, they come from our subliminal being. But our surface mind is not aware the source. Again, one may ask, if that is the case, why we are acting most of the times in ignorance? What prevents a full play of this subliminal being in our outer parts? Sri Aurobindo says, on one side we get intimations, inspirations from our subliminal being. On the other side, we are also equally exposed to the cosmos, the universe. various kinds of forces are, are coming into us from this universe. We are not aware of the source. So as long as the impacts, the cosmic impacts, do not interfere, the play of the subliminal being goes unhindered. But the moment it's interfered by the cosmic forces, again the play of the subliminal being gets disturbed. We are not able to get the full inspiration, full intuitions. The surface mind, we are not acting in full knowledge. Sri Aurobindo says we are acting in half blindness. Why he says we are acting in half blindness? Because we depend on our senses, which are defective. We think our senses function to their utmost capacity, but they are not. It's not so. Sri Aurobindo says the sense we depend wholly on the functioning of the senses through which we derive our knowledge, but it's a defective functioning, he says. But how our subliminal being functions? He says it has got a more direct and powerful instrumentation. One should know that the knowledge we derive through our senses is an indirect knowledge. It's not a direct knowledge. This is the Sri Aurobindo categorizes the orders of knowledge. The first in the order of categorization, he accords the first place to knowledge by identity. That is one with the object. That is how rishis, when you're in a divine consciousness, you're one with everything. That is a uh, highermost knowledge. Next comes knowledge by direct contact. You are one with the source. You are identified in the consciousness. That is a second. Then the third category is knowledge by direct contact, yet a separative knowledge. You are able to separate from the source. This is the third category. And the fourth category is a indirect knowledge through, not through direct contact. That is how we operate. Our knowledge we get through the senses is an indirect knowledge, because it is in the direct knowledge is direct identification through consciousness, which we do not have. Whereas of subliminal being, it has got a more direct and powerful instrumentation, he says. Why he says it has got a powerful instrumentation instead of a defective instrumentation of our surface personality? Because our subliminal, you know that subliminal being consists of three parts. One is inner physical, inner mental, inner vital. This inner mental, inner vital, inner physical, they are directly connected with the universal physical, universal mental, universal vital. So we have a corresponding parts of our physical, mental, vital in the universe. Our subliminal being is one with those parts, so it gets direct knowledge, whereas our surface mind has to depend on the senses, and it's an indirect knowledge, and it is very defective. That's why Sri Aurobindo says our surface knowledge is a half blindness, whereas our inner being's knowledge has got more clarity of consciousness and vision. Because our surface mind is limited to the interpretation of the sense images and sense vibration. It has its own limitations. That's why no two persons can perceive things, even though they have the similar sense organs, but no two persons perceive the same thing in the same way. It's very interesting to note that a subliminal being has its own ways of perception. It has inner sense, subtle sense of vision, hearing, touch, smell, taste, whatever we have in our surface self, the corresponding aspects are present in our subliminal nature in the subtle way. For example, our surface mind, our senses have only limited range of things. For example, I can't see beyond a certain limit. I can't hear beyond certain limit. Whereas this restricted range is not applicable to our subliminal being. It can see things which is far beyond. It can hear things which is far beyond. And one more thing is that whatever images the subliminal being gets, it's more, Sri Aurobindo says, it's more symbolic rather than actual. In the sense that when something is symbolic, it carries more significance and depth than the actual. We think the actual, we are able to understand much better the actual, but it's not so. What Sri Aurobindo says, that's why he called all the languages of the Vedas as a Vedic symbolism. The profoundest knowledge was expressed through Vedic symbols. Likewise, our subliminal being gets the knowledge in terms of symbols. The images found in our subliminal being is more symbolic rather than actual. Yet, Sri Aurobindo says, our outer mind, however best it is, but it's incapable of interpreting the action of our subliminal being. Our subliminal sense, the action is so complex that it will be confusing and misleading if it is interpreted by our outer mind. And the secret of the operations of the subliminal being is unknown to our surface mind. So to really understand the way our subliminal being operates, Sri Aurobindo says one should have a greater power of intuition, greater power of discrimination. We should know what is truth and what is false. Then only we can judge and interpret rightly the messages we get from our subliminal being. Whatever images, we can perceive images and experiences in our subliminal being. For example, we see certain images in our dreams. Those images come from our subliminal being, but we are unable to interpret them because of a lack of knowledge. Why? Because our consciousness is restricted, imprisoned within the walls of our five senses. Beyond that, our consciousness doesn't go. That's why we are unable to interpret rightly the messages given by our subliminal being. We have seen that our subliminal being has got a better clarity of vision, better clarity of consciousness. That's because it enters into other beings, other objects by a mode of direct contact of consciousness. It doesn't have to depend on the external senses as our surface mind does. Because of this facility, because it has got a direct contact of consciousness, Sri Aurobindo says an important aspect of subliminal being is that it can cause a self-communicating impact of thoughts and feelings and forces, he says. What does he mean by that? Self-communicating impact of thoughts and feelings and forces by a direct intimation. See, For example, if I want to communicate my thought, I'm communicating my thought now. I have to depend on my words to communicate my thought with those present here. Whereas this it's a handicap. Whatever I thought, only in a limited way I can express through my words. Whereas supposing I have a direct contact with you all at the subliminal level, I don't have to depend on the expression through words. I can create a direct impact of thought and feelings. It's quite possible. Sri Aurobindo says it's possible. A positive fallout of this is that if we can consciously develop positive thoughts of goodwill, love, harmony towards others, you will have a better human relationship. You can experiment and see. If we constantly develop love, thoughts of goodwill, and harmony with those around you, without yourself expressing them in words, you'll get a positive response from those people around you. It has been proven that it happens. Why? Because our subliminal being is in direct contact with the subliminal being of others. We can make use of this phenomenon in our daily life to get a better human relationship. Sri Aurobindo says our inner being or subliminal being achieves an immediate, intimate, and accurate spontaneous knowledge of persons, objects, and occult phenomena. It has got a spontaneous knowledge. It doesn't have to wait for it doesn't have to depend on any outward signs. More importantly, Sri Aurobindo says, unless we are meeting other we are in touch in our social interaction, we are in touch with other people, and we are able to perceive their thoughts and feelings to the extent they communicate to us. Beyond that, we will not be able to know what they really think, what their feeling really is. Whereas our subliminal being is able to have a direct awareness of thoughts and feelings of others. This is a special capacity of our subliminal being. If we develop our subliminal being, if we learn to live more and more inwardly, we will be able to gauge others' thoughts, what their feelings are in a better way than otherwise being communicated by other means. And Sri Aurobindo says, whomsoever we meet in our life, in our daily life, there is a constant interchange of forces happening at our mental, vital, and subtle physical level. There is a constant mental, vital, and subtle physical exchanges taking place. Are we aware of them? We are not aware of them unless something really impacts us in the most visible manner. Otherwise, we are quite unaware of them, because this interchange takes place in a very subtle way, in a very invisible way. But when we begin to live within, in our subliminal parts, we will be able to understand these interactions. See, one may ask, well, what are we going to gain by knowing this? Because we are being impacted by these exchanges. There are beneficial exchanges taking place, There are exchanges which are not really beneficial, sometimes harmful also. They are taking place in our social interaction. Once we are conscious in our subliminal being, Sri Aurobindo says we can gain the capacity to accept or reject or defend ourselves or isolate ourselves, so that one can really choose as to what is to be received and what is to be rejected. We can really isolate ourselves. We can protect ourselves from unwarranted impacts. We can do so only when we live inwardly. Otherwise, it's not possible. And we know that our surface knowledge is very much limited. We live in our present moment. We don't know anything about we don't know anything what is going to happen the next moment. We're quite ignorant about it. Similarly, our knowledge of the past also, it's very vague. We don't know what's going to happen in future. The foreknowledge of things to come, we lack in our surface being. Whereas our subliminal being has the foreknowledge of things to come. Not only that, it intimates our surface mind about unexplained warnings. Sometimes we get some warnings which we may not be able to explain in words, but something we know that something may be warning us that this is not good. This is not the way to react. Something will be always warning us. That comes from a subliminal being. Secondly, premonitions. Something is going to happen. We may get some uneasy feeling. And we get attracted towards somebody without any reason. And we repel somebody without any reason. That is because the origin of these movements come from have their origins in our subliminal being. And we get ideas, suggestions. Sometimes we get obscure intuitions. We get intuitions, but it's not very clear. We are unable to interpret. All these things come from our subliminal being, he says. Because subliminal being has the capacity to forecast things ahead of time, because it can overcome the time barrier. Whereas we can't overcome the time barrier. We live within the precincts of time, whereas our subliminal being is capable of transcending the time barrier and can forecast things much ahead. So one can make use of this if he has got the capacity to live in his subliminal consciousness. And more importantly, we all of us acquire knowledge. How we acquire knowledge? Through various sources, mostly through our senses. Mostly through our senses, we acquire knowledge. We read books, we meet people, we get to know of things. But we think by all this process, we are acquiring knowledge. We call somebody a highly learned person if he has got a lot of uh, academic degrees behind his name. But what Sri Aurobindo says is that real knowledge is always within, it's not really acquired. Knowledge of everything is pre-existent in our subliminal being. Sri Aurobindo says the knowledge of everything is pre-existent in our subliminal being. We think we have acquired, but it's an illusion. It's not really acquired. It's already pre-existing. What Sri Aurobindo says, what happens is that when we establish a contact, one existence makes a contact with another existence. So there is an identity. This identity awakens in the self the dormant knowledge in our subliminal being. There is a knowledge which is dormant in our subliminal self. This knowledge is awakened by this contact. So what comes up as a knowledge is already the knowledge within our subliminal being. But we think we have acquired the knowledge. Our surface mind sees all knowledge as if it's been acquired by itself. But it's not really so. All knowledge is within us. So this is one important point we should know. And nothing escapes the viewer, nothing escapes our subliminal being, he says. See, we perceive so many things in our life, but our senses can grasp only to a limited extent what is around us. Only to a limited extent. We can hear only to a limited extent. We can see only to a limited extent. But our subliminal being, nothing escapes its view. Nothing is it. Everything it perceives. Subliminal being perceives everything, and he says nothing escapes its view. And Sri Aurobindo says whatever we perceive, we remember only a little part of it is stored in our memory, and then again, our intelligence brings out a smaller part of what is stored in our memory. Again, our will makes use of that portion, still a smaller portion. So, whatever we make use of is very little of what we have really perceived. Whereas subliminal being perceives everything and it makes use of everything. There is no wastage. Yeah, our inner being retains everything that it has ever received. Do we have a complete access to whatever we have received through our surface mind? We do not. As we already seen, we retain only a smaller part in our memory, and a smaller part is brought out through our intelligence, and a still smaller part is put to use. Whereas our subliminal being has ready access to everything it has stored. So such is the capacity of a subliminal being. And whatever our apparent being, our surface self, whatever we are, it is all made up by our subliminal self. Our subliminal self makes up our apparent being. And in fact, what Sri Aurobindo says is that we think we are acting with our full capacity. And what the truth is that our subliminal being selects from its perceptions, memories, and activities, and out of these selections, it makes us act in our surface self. So it is only selections. Our perceptions, our memories, our carrying out of our will and intelligence are only a selection from its perceptions, memories, activities, and relations of will and intelligence. That means what? We don't act in our fullest capacity. Whatever we do, it is only a selection by our subliminal self. That's why Sri Aurobindo says is that it is really our subliminal self which provides the whole material of our apparent being. It selects as how we have to act, what we have, in what activity we should engage ourselves in. All these things are selected by our subliminal self. So there is nothing that our surface being does on its own. Everything is being prompted by our subliminal self. And whatever we think we are in our apparent being, it is really made up by our subliminal self. That's what he says. If so much is the qualities, so much are the qualities, so much is the significance of our subliminal being, is there any scientific study of our subliminal phenomena? Are there any conclusive studies regarding this subliminal phenomena? One may ask. Sri Aurobindo says is that the studies are there, but they are not deeper. They relate to only the outer parts of our nature, but they are not deeper. He says, why this? Because any scientific study has to employ certain methodology, a methodology of inquiry, standards of proof. Based on that only, it has to arrive at a conclusion, right? But this methodology and standards of proof, they are only proper to our surface mind. They are not proper to our subliminal self. For example, I take an instrument which will work only in a particular place. It will not work in a different place. I can't take this instrument elsewhere and make it work. Likewise, I can adopt the norms and standards which I use for my surface mind to the subliminal self. That's why all the scientific studies are inconclusive, he says. We are unable to, they are unable to make out a really a lasting conclusion on the subliminal being. Mostly we think subliminal means something, and even now, the world of psychology, they always confuse the subconscious part and subliminal part. When they mean subconscious, they really mean subliminal. They say that the power of subconscious mind and all that. But Sri Aurobindo makes a very clear distinction. Subliminal and subconscious are not the same. Subliminal is far more powerful than the subconscious, because subconscious is something which is closer to the border of the inconscious. If you see the diagram, we see in the lowermost part there is subconscious, still lowest is the inconscient. So the subconscious is something which is on the borders of inconscience. High above is a subliminal being, which has got which is a vast reservoir of all powers and capacities. So there is a clear distinction between subconscious and subliminal being. Sri Aurobindo says our subliminal consciousness is much wider, much luminous. It's full of light, more in possession of itself and things than our waking surface consciousness. It's more in possession of things. It can act in whatever way it wants with full control. It's not driven by anything else. And subliminal being, on one hand, it is in its lowest parts, it has subconscious and inconscient, and the highest part, in its highest part, it has superconscious. It is connected with the superconscious high above. So these are all the two ends. On one side, on the upper side, it is connected with the superconscious, and the lower side, it is connected with the subconscious and inconscient. And one more important aspect of this subliminal being, which we should know, if we see the diagram, we are given a full green circle of cosmic consciousness. Cosmic consciousness is something which is around us. The cosmic consciousness has got everything at the universal scale. We have universal mind, universal vital, universal physical. Are we in contact with our cosmic consciousness through our surface mind? We are not. As we already seen, we are imprisoned within our five senses. We are imprisoned within our surface mind and ego. Because of that, we are limited in our egoistic individual consciousness. We are not aligned with the cosmic consciousness. Whereas our subliminal being is able to expand itself, is able to break through the walls. It's able to expand itself, and it is able to be one with cosmic consciousness. That is a speciality of our subliminal being. That is how it is in direct contact with the universal mind, universal vital, universal physical. Because of that, it has got a direct knowledge. Whereas our subliminal being has to depend on the instrument of knowledge through senses. It has got the indirect way of acquiring knowledge. Whereas our subliminal being, because it is one with the cosmic consciousness, it has got direct access to the universal knowledge. So it's able to communicate with the cosmic consciousness, and it is at the top level, it is higher level, it is able to communicate with the superconscient. Lowest level, it has subconscient and inconscient. This is how the subliminal being organized. And the right hand and the right corner, we have seen, Sri Aurobindo has given, that our surface mind and ego are the dome of a temple jutting out from the waves, whereas a larger part of our self, subliminal self, is submerged within the waters. That's what he says. That is how we have given this diagram. And see, why subliminal being is very important in yoga sadhana. We have talked about subliminal being. Why it is so important? Because our object is to be in touch with our psychic consciousness, especially in integral yoga. The foremost objective of our sadhana is to be in touch with our psychic consciousness. Our true mind, true vital, true physical consciousness, that is our inmost physical, mental, and vital, they are very closer to the psychic being. That's so without getting into the subliminal being, we can't reach our psychic consciousness. That's why it's very important in our yoga sadhana. We have to break the limitations of our ignorant external self. And we have to go through that. Only then we can get the psychic knowledge. That is how the sadhana becomes real. That's why so much importance is being given by the mother and Sri Aurobindo to live within, to go within our subliminal being, so that we'll be able to access to our psychic being. And the mother says, especially when in dreams, we are able to communicate our subliminal self. He says most of the dreams, Sri Aurobindo says, in Life Divine itself, he says, we can't simply dismiss dreams as a falsehood or an illusion. Dreams have got a greater value. It has got a sense of reality when it arises from the plane of the subliminal self. The dream during our dreams, we get so many images, experiences. They come from different planes. Some come from our subconscious planes. Some come from a superficial plane, but some dreams come from our subliminal plane. All those dreams arise from our subliminal plane. They have got a greater sense of reality. That's why they say, Sri Aurobindo says, those dreams do carry more realistic value. You can't simply dismiss them as dreams. They have greater significance. That's why the mother says, Very often one dreams in the subliminal, the mother says. And the intimations you get through such dreams has more reality and more, and it carries more knowledge than what we outwardly gain. And because the subliminal being is internal, what happens in the outer is decided by the internal. The subliminal being is very important in the yoga sadhana. The mother says it's like tasting the fruit. For example, you want to taste a fruit. You are seeing a fruit. It has got a beautiful color, beautiful skin, a beautiful aroma. But is that enough? Unless you taste the fruit, you are able to taste the flesh of the fruit. You're not able to appreciate the taste of the fruit. That's why likewise, our subliminal being is a real self. Without knowing our subliminal self, we will not be able to know our true self. And the mother says, how are we to understand that? How one can be conscious of our subliminal self? His mother says only by habit. He says, whatever we do, whenever we speak, whenever we think, we should note that there is a second layer behind each and every one of our acts. There is always a second layer. Remember that there is a second layer between between our act, the way I speak, the way I think. That one should be conscious that there is a second layer. If you constantly remember that, you will be able to slowly get into that, he says. And one should always reflect and looks at oneself in thinking. This is how the mother says. Whenever you do reflect, there is some source from which it is coming. If you more and more reflect consciously, then you will be able to get into the subliminal being more and more, he says. And finally, we will find out there are certain exercises for growth and mastery to live inwardly, to live within. These are all very brief. I require another session in a workshop to deal at length for these exercises, but I'll briefly hint upon 4 or 5 methods. One is, of course, stepping back, the mother and Aurobindo says, because when you step back, we remain quiet and we call on the divine force and we wait for an answer. The answer comes from a higher plane, not from a surface man. This is one. Another is becoming aware of oneself. We should know the various movements of our being within us. Supposing I have a movement with taking place in me, I should know where does the plane, which plane does it belong to? Where does it happen in my vital? Does it happen in my mental? Does it happen in my physical? And put it in the right place. The right place is, of course, psychic. But as far as possible, you try to put it in itself in the right place, he says. This is one way. That is becoming aware of all the movements that is taking place in oneself. Third is self-observation and self-organization. He says, whatever we do, whatever movements, whatever impulsions that arise in us, you put it before the mother says, the tribunal of our highest ideal. Place it before the tribunal of our highest ideal, whether it is a right moment, whether it should be accepted or not. This is one way, so that we can eliminate unwanted moments. And mother says one should visualize and discover one's own being. Imagine a big house. Imagine there are so many rooms inside. Visualize all the inner parts as each room. You're going you're passing one room after another. One part of another we are visiting. Visualize so that you can get into the inmost part of yourself. This is one way, mother says. And of course, we have to awaken the inner consciousness. The practice of concentration. Sri Aurobindo recommends 2 steps. One is concentration in the heart. the concentration, the heart opens within, and by following this inward opening, going deep, one becomes aware of the soul or psychic being, the divine element in the individual. This is one way of concentration. Second is concentration in the head, in the mental center. It brings about the silence of the surface mind. It opens yourself to it makes you receive a higher spiritual experience and spiritual knowledge, and a silent you're opening yourself to the silent mental consciousness upwards, whatever above mind you're opening. So these are all some very brief hints I am giving because of paucity of time, because this everyone will ask. We are talking about surface, we are talking about the subliminal self, how to get there. This is one question comes to us. I've just briefly hinted upon with this. Would like to conclude this, and once again, and thank these organizers, and I thank all the listeners for having patiently listened to my talk, and I thank the Mother and Aurobindo for having given this opportunity. Thank you very much, Sanjeev ji. Over to you.
Immense gratitude, Sivakumar ji, for taking us through this in a very systematic way. And I could see that you were also taking us through this according to your notes, section by section. And then as you were talking, I had lots of questions, but then you were answering them as we went along. I do have one or two other questions which I will ask. And if anybody else would like to reflect or ask a question, please put it on the chat, then I can read it. So while we're doing that, can I please ask, we in our sadhana, we are, or in our lives, we are making sure that our psychic being develops and evolves. And this goes from life to life, birth to birth. Does this mean that the subliminal is not actually evolving because it's actually aware of everything, and it remains as a layer around this psychic being as it develops? Or does the subliminal also develop at the same time?
No doubt, it is a psychic being which evolves from birth to birth. Because it evolves, it acquires certain characters, right? Because it evolves, it acquires certain characters, and it doesn't stop with the psychic being. The character acquired, it influences the outer parts are also influenced by the psychic growth. What are the outer parts? We have seen that the inmost mind, vital and physical, inner mind, inner physical, inner vital. That means what? And not alone that, not only that, our surface mind, vital and physical. Our whole being is being influenced by this evolutionary growth of our psychic being. Nothing is left out.
Thank you for that. There's one question here. What is the relationship between imagination and subliminal?
Aurobindo says, imagination is one of the tools which is employed by our consciousness to know something which we do not know. We are not, one should understand that we are not conscious, or our level of consciousness is not continuous. We are aware of our only, or we have only momentary consciousness. Greater part of our past we do not know. Greater part of our future we do not know. We do not know which is beyond our physical dimensions. Whatever within our the space and time dimensions, we know. Beyond that, we are quite ignorant. Yet the imagination gives us, the power of imagination gives us some sort of an idea about what we do not know. That's all. And this imagination is a limited tool, whereas our subliminal consciousness is far superior than our imagination. Imagination can be prompted by our subliminal being, but our subliminal being is beyond our imagination. Whatever the imagination can work up to a certain level, whereas our subliminal being has got a greater knowledge than what our imaginations can bring. Okay, subliminal is an ocean of knowledge. Out of that, imagination is one such tool by which it sends out certain portion of our knowledge. Compared to subliminal knowledge, imagination is limited.
Thank you very much. We had a request that if you could just recap Einstein's quote, please. You know, you mentioned that Einstein had said something about intuition.
Yeah. You want me to requote?
Yes, please.
I'll do that. Just bear with me for a few seconds.
Yeah, no problem.
Einstein, I quote Einstein, I believe in intuition and inspiration. At times, I feel certain I am right while not knowing the reason. I very rarely think in words at all. A thought comes and I may try to express it in words afterwards. It's only a brief. He has spoken more about this inspiration and intuition. I've just taken out a few sentences from his.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That was very good, and I think it'll lead us to maybe find the extended version of what he has said about intuition and thoughts as well. And another question here is, you mentioned the subtle physical. I'm afraid we're probably going towards another topic, you know, which will be another workshop perhaps at some point. But in your diagram, where does the subtle physical sit? And what does it represent that is different from the surface being?
Can you please once again project the diagram?
Okay.
Yeah. This inner physical is nothing but subtle physical.
Inner physical is subtle physical.
Inner physical is nothing but subtle physical. Sri Aurobindo calls it as subtle inner physical also, subtle physical also. Interchangeably he uses. Whatever is outside is gross, whatever is inside is subtle, and the subtle physical belongs to subliminal self. That's what he says.
Okay. So I have a question also based on your diagram. You have a circle that is pink in color as the inmost being. Is there a name to this, or is this still part of the subliminal?
No, this is what Sri Aurobindo says, inmost. Inmost are true. The terminology used by Sri Aurobindo is that he distinguishes between this He makes a further distinction in the subliminal being, distinction between inner physical, inner mental, inner vital, and the inmost physical, mental, and vital. Why he calls it inmost? Because it is very close to the inmost being, that is our true being, that our psychic being. The inmost being is our psychic being, because the parts associated with our inmost being, he calls it inmost physical, inmost mental, inmost vital. You can
So,
call
so
it maybe Purusha, inmost Purusha. Sometimes he calls this by name also. He calls it by mental Purusha, physical Purusha, and vital Purusha. This also Sri Aurobindo uses this term also. The inmost being of the corresponding outer parts, he calls it by respective Purusha elements. He says physical Purusha, mental Purusha, and vital Purusha.
so are they part of the psychic being, or are they part of
And they are closely associated with our psychic being. They are not parts. They are very much in touch with our psychic being, influenced by psychic being. For example, if one acts from his inmost mental, inmost vital, it has got a more psychic nature in it. It has got more psychic nature. Supposing when one acts from his inner mind, inner mental, inner vital, it has got a more psychic influence. Because this is very near to psychic being, the influence of the psychic being is most felt by these parts.
That's very clear. And you also mentioned, again, sticking to this diagram, that there is a wall between our surface being and our subliminal being. And sometimes we have intimations from the subliminal because there are cracks and defects. Is there a name for this wall?
In fact, this is I'm not able to find anything as far as I know. If anyone, I don't know, because I've anywhere else. If Sri Aurobindo has mentioned, I would be glad to hear. He has not mentioned anything about. He has not given any name to this wall.
Name.
If you come across anything, any of our, really glad to this thing. But I don't. I've seen in the Live Divine, he has not given. Uh, uh, any name for that?
Okay.
Any name for that? Any name for that?
Thank you. There's another question here. Do adverse forces manage to enter into the subliminal being?
Yeah, see, these adverse forces do manage to enter into our surface being, because we are not aware of their entry. We are ignorant about the exchange of forces with the cosmos around us. Whereas our subliminal being is fully aware of all these exchanges. If once a subliminal being is very active, when one lives in his subliminal consciousness, instead of his surface consciousness, he will know which forces. He will be able to get a complete grasp of this exchange of forces, and he'll be able to exercise a better control over the exchange of these forces. He may admit only those forces which are helpful to him. He may refuse entry to all these adverse forces. That is one greatest advantage of living in subliminal consciousness, because subliminal consciousness has got the full knowledge of the kind of forces that make an impact on us. We'll be able to accept, reject, and exercise control. All these things we can do only when we live in our subliminal consciousness.
That's very clear. Thank you so much. I think that's the end of all the questions. And like I said, I had lots of questions while you were talking, but you actually answered them as you've gone on in the talk. So, and
Thank you.
I'm very happy also that you ended up with our action points, which often are the same theme for all workshops, like living inwardly by stepping back, becoming aware of oneself, self-observation and concentration. Indeed, we will have a future workshop on living inwardly or living within. I think.
Yeah, Sanjeev ji, one thing I want to say, because people will think, okay, we know all these things, but how to go about? What is the action plan? You tell me the action. All these things theoretical they may say, but okay, theory should be known. We should know that such thing exists. And
Yeah.
as you suggested, we'll have one more clear workshop on these practices and exercises to gain mastery, to live, to mastery, to live within.
Yes.
To gain mastery, to live within, there are certain exercises and there are certain tips given by the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. We will focus on that so that we can make it into a practice of sadhana. So it will help us in our sadhana. That's very important. This knowledge is also very important. At the same
Yes.
time, sadhana part also is very important.
Yes. I propose that normally we would have a workshop at the center on the third Sunday, but in order that more people can benefit from this, perhaps the workshop in 2 weeks' time, we can keep it online if we can tackle this subject.
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay, wonderful. So once again, on behalf of everyone who's joined us and from AUROMIRA Center, thank you so much for sharing your understanding with us. And it's been very, very beneficial, very important, and very influential. I'd like to end now with some music from Savitri, and then we can disperse silently. Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much. Thank you very much.
In us too, the intuitive fire can burn. An agent light, it is coiled in our folded heart. On the celestial levels is its home. Descending, it can bring those heavens here.